Anna. I'm so excited to have you here from co-living in Montenegro to amazing meetups across the world. You are probably the most well-traveled person I know on the crypto conference circuit. And for good reason, because you've been in the space for quite a while, and especially with your current role at the Celo Foundation, really focusing on developer relations and community. So I can't wait to dive into everything that you're building there, what the future has in store. And first, just quickly, where are you calling in from and what are you focused on these days?
So excited to be here and chatting with you. It's always good to find time to catch up. I am actually in New York right now. I am here. I was just here for the Masari mainnet and the whole week of events and ETH Global New York, and then also just visiting some family and friends. And then also personally planning a cross country, cross world, cross ocean move all the way down to South Africa, where I've been spending time, splitting my time for the last couple of years, but now we'll probably be spending a lot more time in. And then professionally, I am, like you said, I'm a partner. I'm a developer relations partner at the Celo Foundation. And I think I've had kind of like a non-traditional path into that role. So maybe we can get into it later on. But I think it's probably like one of, from what I see, is a very, very big and growing role in our space. So I think it's kind of an interesting story how I got into it.
How did you make that leap from a lot of like production and media and social and content into Maker?
The thread of community is really what runs through all of it. And I think I had a seed of community planted really early on. I like one of my first internships, like this was still back when I was like finishing high school, so maybe my senior year before I was about to go off to college. I had this internship at a small startup that was housed at the time of the General Assembly in Flatiron in New York, because they were running boot camps for coding, but they were also like leasing their extra space to startups. I don't even know if that's the case anymore, but there's this like 4-person startup working in edtech, and they were doing like kind of like Khan Academy style, like whiteboard style tutorials, but for iPads. And I saw some kind of post about it that they were looking for an intern to do, to essentially like work under their community manager. And I didn't even know, like, that was not a role that I've heard about at the time. I feel like that wasn't even a role that existed really, but I was like, what is this community manager thing? I was really interested. And so I applied and got in, and I spent probably like a semester, like the spring semester, interning there. And what I learned is was all about like user-generated content. A lot of user-generated content was being created, and this particular startup was all about like users creating whiteboard style tutorials to teach somebody how to do something. And you needed to have people like moderating that content, like going through, like building community, and also like encouraging more people to create this kind of content. And this was really new. Like this was really like a very new field and a very new, I think, industry at the time, because like, yeah, like that wasn't really a role that existed. And like I feel like I kind of forgot that that was the very beginnings, but like actually my very first internships was like in community before I feel like that was really an industry and a pathway. But then kind of after that I graduated, I didn't really follow, like I feel like that seed was planted, but it wasn't really like manifested until much later on. And I did go to school. I wanted to focus on media and media studies. Like I wanted to be in the media studies department, but I was also like just always really interested in how technology is going to change the way that we work and like nature of work. It was always something that really fascinated me. And like I even remember even in college, like writing on like one of those like job fair things, like that the job that I will have doesn't exist yet. Like I just always had this conviction that I feel like something was going to happen that was going to change how we worked. And that's ultimately exactly what happened. And through college, I found that there was a way to actually create your own major. I was like, oh, there's so many things I'm interested in. And creating my own major is going to allow me to take classes within the media studies department, within marketing and media, which I felt like digital media was changing so much of how like advertising was going to be done, with platforms like YouTube and Instagram, like user-generated content. Again, like that theme kept coming up. So I was like, oh, I really want to focus on entrepreneurship. So I created my own major within media studies department that was like media and entrepreneurship. And that was just really intellectually stimulating for me. Like that was so interesting. And it felt like there weren't courses that you could learn this stuff from at the time. Like actually working in the field was the best way that you can really learn these skills. And so I applied for a startup cohort where I had like my own ideas and I was just interested in exploring them. I feel like I learned much more by doing than by learning. And so yeah, when I graduated, I don't think there was a pathway back for me to like have a traditional job. I just like wanted to do something on my own. And so I spent time in consulting, and I started this boutique agency where I was doing media consulting. And then that led me, turns out there's a massive overlap between people who do marketing work and who travel and who are also into crypto. So then that's how I kind of later fell down the crypto rabbit hole. And then, yeah, the rest is really history.
So how did you find Maker? And like why did you choose to go to MakerDAO to really lead the community? I know you started as freelance, but like how were you approached? How did you even hear about it? Because it was relatively early on. It was, it was in 2020. Yeah, how did that happen?
Yeah, so right before that, I had already started attending a lot of meetups because I was already traveling and doing a lot of freelance work for like traditional Web2 companies. And then I found this like whole other community. And that's when a light switch went on, I guess. And I was like, oh, that's what I really meant when I said like new technologies were going to change the nature of work. It wasn't necessarily going to be the Web2 companies, although that also did happen. And there were like new roles that were created as a result of that. Like even like social media manager, to think of that, like that wasn't a job back when I was in school, really. And so yeah, I was like, oh, this is really what I meant. But there wasn't really a path for me to work in it yet. I felt like I was like on the outskirts, which is why I started this blog, which was like kind of a way for me to just like, I don't know, learn a little bit about the industry and like get to attend some conferences and get like press passes, which was super cool. So this was like, I got to attend the Malta AI and Blockchain Summit in 2018 or 2019. And just like really kind of like as an observer, I wasn't really working in it yet. And then when like roughly around the same time that the world went into quarantine, I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? Kind of like everything is changing, but also I had a lot more time on my hands. And I had friends already who were working in the industry who were like, well, you've always like talked about this, like you've always been super interested. Like, why don't you just like pivot into crypto now? Like, yeah, like you have much more time. And so I spent like several months diving really deep into all things crypto. Maker was one of the communities that I found because they had this like amazing contributor program that you can come and contribute at a freelancer basis. And they really like pioneered this idea that you can come and like earn and learn and contribute at the same time. And like you're doing all these things together, like as you're doing freelance work, you're also doing it for grants, like you're receiving grants, and then as you're receiving pay in crypto, you're learning more about crypto. So like then you have to open a wallet, you have to start using it. So it's like actually a really great way to onboard people into crypto industry in general through work and through like contributing something meaningful to the community. And I had all the skills, like I've already been doing a lot of this work. So like one of the things that we're doing was building this community portal and to essentially like onboard more people into documentation. And so I jumped on doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And then really found it so fascinating and that found that like idea of onboarding people so fascinating that I just started creating more programs. And then eventually, just like got noticed by other people, was doing a lot of good work. And then actually ended up getting hired to work for the foundation to lead a lot of those community programs. Because Maker was going through a very interesting time when they were going from the foundation to the DAO. And they really need a lot of people who had that interest in community and had that passion to kind of like steer that transition and figure out what is going to be the pathway from foundation onto a fully bootstrapped DAO operated organization, which was a wild ride. And I learned so much.
It was a really powerful time, to your point about these sort of bounty programs or contributor programs that really were incredible onboarding mechanisms for people to explore and participate and actually have like really,
totally.
Economically viable ways of participating that you could like really dedicate time and intention. And then like what brought you to Celo? So why kind of switch from Maker to Celo? What was the inspiration there?
I spent like probably over a year at Maker, and it was a really pivotal time. And when I was at the foundation, it's an interesting role because I knew that my role at the foundation was to get rid of my own role, like the like the job I came there to do. I knew that I had a timeline, and I knew that like I will be successful when I have essentially decentralized my own role at the foundation. And I really I can't believe how lucky I got, because I really feel like I was there just at the right time, at the right place with the right people. And I've learned so much working with the team there at the foundation. But as we like went through this exercise and the foundation gradually decentralized, I knew that my role would be ending. And so I kind of had a deadline in mind. So I knew I was only going to be there for like a relatively short amount of time. And then I had a lot of options. Like I had an option to join the DAO and kind of take up one of the pathways that I was creating, essentially to create these, like at the time they were called core units, which were kind of like mini companies that were starting up that were getting funding from the DAO, and then we're going to be employed by the DAO essentially to do some kind of work for them. But and which was super interesting. And I think that was like one of the first iterations of that kind of work, of people working not for a traditional company, but for the DAO. But it was also a very uncertain path. I think there was a lot of like so many uncertainties in terms of like how do you even like take crypto or take your full salary in crypto. How do you do your taxes? How do you do like health insurance? Like there's so many, I think, unknowns. And it was part of that. And it was also part of like, I think I had learned so much and I had grown so fast in a year, in one way, that I was like, oh, what else? I kind of had this like fork in the road. I was like, do I either just go onto the DAO and just jump in full like head like over heels into this like DAO experiment that we're setting up? Or do I kind of like take a pause, reflect, and explore what else is out there? And I've spoken to because a lot of people knew that Maker had just gone through this transition. Like a lot of companies were looking to do something similar, or like were interested in speaking to people who have gone through that. So I had a few conversations, and then Celo ended up recruiting me at around the same time. And it was just such an interesting opportunity because they were a lot earlier on. The foundation had just set up. Like I was one of the first people I think hired to the foundation because they had split from C Labs, the technical partner, into this foundation. They had established this. So I was like, it was an interesting opportunity to do all the programs that I was finishing kind of leading at the Maker Foundation, but there was an opportunity to start it back up somewhere else. It was somewhere that I felt like I could take all of those skills and just like see it from a much earlier stage. And I started on the ecosystem team. So like my role was also a community. So I was essentially like a community program lead at Maker. And then it was also a community lead at Celo Foundation on the ecosystem team first. So it was like a very similar role, but a very different timeline, which was exciting to me.
And so for people who may not be familiar, can you just give the one line of like what is Maker and what is Celo, and like in terms of their mission, vision, and how they sort of differentiate themselves from other protocols?
Yeah, I mean, so Maker is a protocol in Ethereum, and it's a stablecoin protocol. And now they've expanded to several other products and lines, and now it's a whole. I can't even keep up with what Maker is now. So this is not a one-liner from current. This is like one-liner previously. And Celo is a layer 1 protocol. So Celo also has a protocol for stablecoins, for generating stablecoins. But I always used to say like Mento, which is the stablecoin part of Celo, is Mento to Celo is what Maker is to Ethereum. So like Maker is a stablecoin protocol of Ethereum. Celo is the layer 1 blockchain, which now there's actually a proposal for Celo to become a layer 2. So that's a whole other topic. But when I joined, Celo was a layer 1. And Celo, one of the things that ran on top of Celo was a protocol called Mento, which is also a way to create stablecoins. But there's much more other kinds of utility. So Celo is a underlying layer 1 protocol, whereas Maker is a protocol on top of Ethereum.
Super helpful. And why is Celo making a proposal to become a layer 2? Just layer 2, and for people who are less familiar, is usually applications or something that's running on top of another layer 1, which I think in this case, this proposal, Celo's proposing becoming a layer 2 on top of Ethereum. So maybe just like a quick blurb on what drives a decision like that in that protocol.
Definitely. It's really interesting. So the proposal came around July. It was at ECC. They've announced at ECC this year. And it came from C Labs, which is a technical partner who originally bootstrapped Celo protocol, but it has then become a governance proposal and then voted on and passed a temperature check that the community wants, in fact, does want Celo to go that direction. And I think for Celo, it's a very interesting layer 1, because when Celo launched, it was like 4 years ago. It was the first EVM compatible layer one that had like really, that first of all had proof of stake a long time before Ethereum was proof of stake and was going to be proof of stake, and had EVM compatibility and low transactions and low gas, and like, yeah, cheap and fast transactions. So it was only possible at the time as a separate layer one blockchain. But then in the years since, obviously Ethereum became proof of stake. There's a lot more other layer ones that have very similar utility. Like there's scaling solutions. It's just we're in a very different environment. And so I think the best direction for us, it's always been an Ethereum aligned ecosystem. And I think the best direction is to continue scaling Ethereum rather than being an L1 ecosystem. But I think there's a lot more that folks can learn by going to the forum post and like reading the full thread, but that's kind of like the one liner. So I think it's just a very different ecosystem and a very different time from when Celo first launched.
Super interesting. And can you give a quick brief of like, what is the role of a foundation? Because you sort of mentioned there's like this technical partner typically, and then there's a foundation. So you've mentioned this is the structure within Celo, but it also is pretty common within blockchains in general. So what is the role of a foundation?
Yeah, I mean, typically, and this is the case at Maker and at Celo, typically a foundation will steward the ecosystem around the protocol or around a layer one ecosystem. So typically, there might be a technical partner or some kind of like a labs component who where like engineering and product and sometimes like research or other technical teams sit within, and then a foundation is oftentimes responsible for like ecosystem and specifically like stewarding ecosystem. And I think how I used to describe my role at the foundation when I was on the ecosystem team is like we're kind of the bridge between the technical protocol and the community. And back when I was doing a lot of community work, I always felt like my role was to bridge resources, in terms of like funding, but also in terms of like knowledge transfer or some kind of like tech or like talent resources or like team to the community, so that the community ultimately can also do things and grow the ecosystem that way. So I think they're kind of like foundations are oftentimes stewards of the ecosystem growth, and they kind of kickstart and jumpstart that growth.
I loved how like one of the first things you mentioned was it was really cool to get these press passes and be able to like go to these different conferences and like really dive into what was going on. And now like you've made that like your full career basically, right? Like being able to go to these different places and develop the ecosystem and develop all these relationships. What do you feel like has been the most exciting or valuable thing that you've learned that maybe other community developers or ecosystem leads should know of, like what really works, what really if you were going to make like 3 investments and go rebuild what you've done for Celo and for Maker, what would be like the first 3 things you do?
I feel like to kind of understand that, I should just like go into like a super brief point of like around like what I do now and how that's different from what I did in the past in terms of doing developer relations. Because I transitioned to that team at the beginning of this year, like around January this year, because I realized that at a company like Celo, at a protocol like a layer one protocol, really like one of your most important communities is your community of developers. Like there's obviously users and there's ecosystem partners and like startup founders. All of those people are really important stakeholders to grow your ecosystem. But like really probably one of the most important segments of your community is your developers. And so I transitioned to that role, into that team, because I felt like that was really interesting segment to be in. It was something that I could apply my more like programmatic and more like operational skill set to a more technical team and like a more relevant community, I think, for Celo. And so part of my role as a DevRel partner has been kind of executing on a roadmap for events for us, and like how can we do IRL activations for developer onboarding. And so like one of my, I think, greatest not tips, but like like strategies has been really like participating in the ETH Global hackathons. I feel like that's been really huge for us. They run probably some of the best hackathons in the Ethereum space and onboard so many people to Ethereum. And we've been sponsors and partners of ETH Global this year and gotten to travel to a lot of the conferences. And I think that's where we've gotten the most feedback, because it's like hackathons is like when you realize like the things that break and like that's when you like realize things that break in production, or like things that like need improvement. Like that's when people give you the best feedback. Even for the L2 transition, I feel like we've gotten so much feedback around the stack that we might use just like being at hackathons, and then for products, like for different things that C Labs might be working on, or like developer tooling, like that's when you realize what's working and what's not working, and like what is ultimately a good tool to build with, because that's what you want. You want your developers to use your tools and to build products and application layer with it. So I feel like the hackathons are like a great way to discover new potential builders and new promising founders, but also like a great way to get feedback and like to understand what's working and what's not working. So I feel like that would be one of my biggest tips. And then yeah, I mean, I've been super lucky to travel and get to attend a lot of conferences as well that are more like less hackathon and more like conference level.
How do you evaluate and prioritize which ones you're going to focus on? And then when you're there, how do you track and measure the success? Like even more tactically, like how do you get that feedback during the hackathons? How do you then nurture those high potential talent to then be interested in building in your ecosystem?
It's a great question, especially in this current market, because I feel like in the past it was like the strategy was very much like you just want to be everywhere because that's what helps, and that's what that's like one of the ways to get awareness. But I think people have now become much more selective and much more kind of like tactical around which events they should sponsor and how to participate. And I think we have a few like keystone events throughout the year that have kind of become shelling points for people to come. And so even if like companies might not sponsor like the big conference, like Denver, like there might still be some kind of like potential. Like we know that this is going to be a big milestone event of the year. And so we know that there's probably going to be like good side events to partner on, or like other partners to be to do some kind of like meaningful activation with. And when I look at the calendar, I think it's like I look for those key shelling points and like keystone moments, because I know like next year there's going to be DevCon. That's going to be a massive shelling point for people. Dev Connect is going to be a big shelling point. So I think like picking out those big keystone events is the number one kind of task, and then seeing if there's opportunities to be at the big event, or if there's like opportunities to do something on a smaller scale but still have meaningful impact, because like not every event and not every kind of type of activation is going to be right for every company. Like it might not make sense to sponsor a big event, or it might not make sense to sponsor hackathon if like a company's earlier stage and like maybe they don't have as much need for product feedback, but like maybe doing something like like an ecosystem dinner or some kind of like a smaller intimate event actually makes a lot more sense. It's going to be a higher ROI based on the needs and based on the timeline. So I think like really like, starting with keystone moments and understanding what are those shelling points that people are going to be at, and where your community, the people that you want to like target, are going to be at, and then understanding your priorities and understanding your just being like super clear about your priorities and your timeline helps to determine.
And so the topic is super helpful, like super interesting. And we've talked about the developer side, right? Which is really like how you produce value in your ecosystem. I think a thing I'm hearing a lot now is like, what about the user side? Actually like creating value and building like adoption. What do you see is working best, even if it's just in terms of like individuals, projects, or companies that you're really inspired by, who you feel like are doing amazing things to drive actual adoption of the things that they're building?
Adoption comes from just like really high quality application layer on top of Celo. So like it's people who are building some kind of dApps. And one of the most exciting use cases, I think, within our ecosystem that I know of is the partnership that Celo had just recently announced with Opera Pay, or with Opera Browser, creating MiniPay, which is going to be essentially they're giving millions of people access to a wallet in their browser on their phone. And that's like super exciting, because that's a kind of infrastructure that allows the people to build many more apps on top of that and like create more use cases on top of that. And so I think like I think it's the ecosystem partners and it's the ecosystem founders that are driving adoption. And I think our role is like more supporting that and like creating more pathways for more of those founders to thrive and more of those founders to to start those successful companies that will onboard users, because I think we don't directly onboard users ourselves. I think it's more through this like whole funnel where like through hackathons you bring in developers, you bring in talented builders, and then maybe there's like an accelerator they go through or some kind of program they go through where they take their idea from just an idea to a go-to-market or to an MVP, and then they take it to market, and then that's what acquires users. So it's like it's an indirect path, I think, to actual users. But I think there's a lot of things that we can do on our side to make sure that those founders are successful.
I love this. And so one other question I wanted to just talk about and highlight, because I think it's so amazing to see how multifaceted people in the space are and how you have this like deep interest in technology, but then also this like grounded interest in like nature and herbalism. And I'm just sort of curious about like, if you'll share a little bit about that aspect of yourself as well. Like, how do some of like your own personal practices like give you the energy and the like, you know, momentum in life to go and like do these conferences, build these relationships, and like still stay grounded and centered and like healthy in a dynamic where you're like kind of always on a plane, spending a lot of emotional energy to like build relationships and connect. If there's anything you'd love to share of just like what like herbalism and those things have like done in for your life and like things that you find really curious that you're exploring.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like we have this like sub communities within our crypto community who are like so interested in these like more kind of like out there things that seem to be like not connected at all, but then they actually really are, because that's what, like you said, that's what helps us stay grounded and actually like do meaningful work. And I found that like honestly like connecting to more people like how we used to have all these chats about this like has really helped me develop my own practice and develop my own interests. And I've been super inspired by communities like Suzalu, where we've spent a lot of time together, and Cabin is another one. I spent just like a lot of time actually in those communities within this year where you feel like people bring their whole selves to. And I think this is actually one of the things that always attracted me to Celo too. It's like we always used to talk about like our unique purpose and our connectedness as like big parts of how we show up in the world and how you can bring your whole self to work and not like feel like there's things that are that you have to necessarily like leave. And so yeah, for me, it's I'm really passionate about like movement, and like different body work is really a big part of my practice. Learning about learning, I'm like very low level herbalism, I guess, enthusiast. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I would love to learn more about. But yeah, there's like little rituals that we can create for ourselves, I think, that are really nourishing and help us continue to thrive and do the best work, and also be connected to other like-minded people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it's such an important thing to highlight, that like it's not just the work with these other like grounding rituals and practices that we put into place, and then communities that we surround ourselves with to kind of reinforce those things. So yeah, I love that. And I think it's so special to share, and interesting how you bring up this concept of like consciousness and bringing the whole self to Celo. One other thing that you had shared was just even like the unique leadership structure you guys have practiced, which I think is called Teal. Could you just give like a quick, like, what is Teal, and like, how does that play into this idea of sort of like bringing consciousness into business?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. This is like a massive rabbit hole, I feel like. And I don't know if I'm like an expert to speak on this topic, but it's both Celo Foundation and Maker have been kind of like both pioneers in that kind of work. And at Celo, yeah, we practice something called Teal, and it's part of holacracy framework, where you think of the company less of a hierarchy, kind of like a triangle where there's like leadership at the top and then these like descending pyramid like levels of control, but it's more like a network. It's more like circles that are interconnected circles, and like even our teams are called circles. So like I'm part of the DevRel circle, there's like a marketing circle, everything else. So you think of yourself more like a network, which is kind of like also inspired by a lot of like I think ideas. It comes from like a lot of the things around us come from nature, and like how mycelium networks are like really the like spread from trees and plants. And I think that's like one of the mental models for organizations. And Maker, it was also like really similar because the DAO, as the DAO was forming, it was also thinking about how do you go from a foundation to an organization that is more like a network of sub-organizations that are interconnected, but have their own unique purpose. And so I think those two concepts of like unique purpose and connectedness have been threads through a lot of the work that I've done at the organizations that I've been. And so yeah, I feel really lucky to have been part of that and have seen that at work.
To your point of like, you're not necessarily an expert, but you've just experienced these unique, innovative structures. What are the things that you think have been like the pros and the cons of that structure as like a leader of people and teams in a way? Like how do decisions get made? And like aspirationally, it sounds like amazing. So it's sort of like, what are the things that actually have showed up and been amazingly beneficial? And what do you think are some of the challenges you've even if it's just in your personal experience?
The pros are, it's like you have a lot of agency, and with agency also comes great responsibility. And with responsibility, it's actually like, it's not just responsibility, but it's also like really high levels of self-awareness. Like it actually takes a really high level of self-awareness to be able to function really well in these kinds of systems. And you have to be able to, like assess your work. And as a leader, I mean, it's something that you need to cultivate within your team, but also I think it's something that you need to, it's like in some ways, I think it's a little bit self-selective where like people need to opt into these systems. Like it doesn't work necessarily for everybody. But I think that people who are interested in it, like really naturally gravitate to that and really thrive in that. Because if you want to be in an environment with really high agency, then you also have to have a really high degree of just like personal awareness and like responsibility for the work that you do. And so it's a lot more like, I think like proposing things and like taking initiative and really coming up with your own work versus like waiting to be told what to do. And so as a leader, I think it's really important to continue to encourage people like in that kind of like self-awareness and like mindfulness journey in a way, like not just at work, but also like personally. And I think, like having other practices, and that's where a lot of that, I think, personal work comes in, and makes it, I think, more, I think it makes people more successful in those environments.
How do we keep in touch with you as you're out in the world, at these different conferences, and just Celo ecosystem as well? If people are interested in developing or also curious about following along on the roadmap and this new proposal.
With me, the easiest way is probably on Twitter, which is just NLXK, and we can link that, I guess, in the notes. And with Celo, it's also Celo.org on Twitter, and it's Celo.org is the website where you will see the most, I think, updates, and also forum, which is just forum.celo.org. That's where most discussions are happening, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussions coming up now with the L2 proposal as the community kind of thinks about which stack to build on. So I'm excited to follow along. And if anyone's interested, that's the place I encourage you to take a look.
Amazing. Well, I will definitely be following along. I'm so grateful for you being here today. It's been really fun to talk about all things consciousness and community in crypto, and to just know you and be alongside you in this journey of seeing what this new world could be about, that's being invented as we're here, that our younger selves would never have even imagined was possible. So I love that you invented this career for yourself, and thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's always